Welcome, inmates, for your 30 minutes of open air time. Take a seat, let's get you out of those shackles. And what we're gonna talk about today is Mythic Plus. Why do we have to talk about Mythic Plus? Because yesterday for NA and today for EU was the start of the last week of Mythic Plus. No, Mythic Plus is not going to end after this. It was just the last week of the entire cycle. We started with week 1 at the start of 9.1 with Fortified, Bursting and Storming, and now we went through all of the weeks, all of the combination of affixes for Season 2. So, because we are now done, from this point onwards, all we are going to see is a repeat, a recycle of what we have already seen. This calls for some review. This calls for drawing some conclusions about this new season of Mythic Plus and all of the changes that Blizzard put into this season to gauge whether or not, and if it did, by how much, the experience of Mythic Plus has improved compared to Season 1. The first thing that we have to point out before we go over in depth, in detail into how this season has been is the changes that Blizzard put before you even enter the key. Number 1, Keystone exchanging. Blizzard added the feature that upon completing a Mythic Plus dungeon within the timer, you were going to get this guy, Tashup, to spawn and to offer you a one-time keystone exchange to any player in the group, to any player in the party who had his own key at the same level or below of the key you just completed. So let's just say you start the week with a plus 17 Sanguine Depths. Last week, for example, it was Necrotic and Sanguine. You really didn't want to do Sanguine Depths with those affixes, so you go, you complete a plus 17 Halls of Atonement, and that's it. You can talk to the guy and get your Sanguine Depths key re-rolled to something else. The other addition that happened outside of the keys themselves was to be able to receive a keystone, because this guy, who's pretty mobile, was not only at the end of your key, but was also in Oribos. Tashup was also offering you a keystone if you didn't have one. So for example, before, if you didn't complete at least one keystone every week so that it would show up in the Great Vault, you wouldn't get a new key for the next week, for the following week. Now, in Season 2, it doesn't really matter. You can just go and talk to the guy in Oribos and get your key. The last addition outside of the game that you got in Season 2 was Keystone lowering. So before, you had to go to the actual dungeon entrance, you had to start the key and then go out, reset the dungeon, go back in and keep lowering it how much you want. Now, Tashup, this multitasking guy, is also going to offer you to lower your key from Oribos. Something that went quite unnoticed, because every once in a while I do see someone leaving the group saying he has to lower his key. So this did kind of fly over a lot of people's heads that this feature now exists in Oribos. Now that we have gone past the out of the key additions, we have an addition which was half and half, which is the item level. By 9.0.5, towards the end of the first season of Shadowlands, we have gotten the addition of Valor points that you could use to upgrade your gear. And the main difference is that despite the two seasons being roughly the same, because Season 1 brought you up to 220 item level when Mythic was 226, and Season 2 brings you 246 item level when Mythic is 252, so the item level gap between the max Valor point upgrade is still 6 item levels. The differences are, number 1, this change for Season 1 came, of course, months and months into the season, when people already had actually almost 5 months worth of the Great Vault at 252 item level, for example. So it didn't feel like it had as much of an impact. It wouldn't have given players the feeling of how much of a good addition this was, because people already had gotten time to bring up their item level, whereas in 9.1 you had this from the start. In 9.1, provided you got to 2000 rating quickly, you could very, very quickly get a piece of gear to 246. The other change is that the amount of Valor that you could get from Mythic Plus was increased. The amount of Valor that you could get from Mythic Plus was increased. Now, because of the rating, you even get bonus Valor, up to almost 50% Valor bonus if you are improving on your rating and the rest of your group is improving on the rating. So you basically get to upgrade the pieces you get faster. So those were all good changes when it came to Valor points in 9.1. Then as we start getting into the keys, other changes that happened in the season that we are right now, for example, bolstering was nerfed. Bolstering went from giving the mobs 20% max health to 15% max health. The weekly affix we are in right now is a nerfed one. Raging was also nerfed. The damage increase of the mobs getting enraged went from 100% more damage to 75. We did get necrotic also being nerfed. I know, doesn't matter much, people still hate necrotic and it's still very annoying, but it was nerfed. Now the big elite mobs, the lieutenant mobs in keys, are going to apply necrotic wounds at half the rate, so much more slowly. Storming was also made much more of a joke. A joke on a similar level to what it was for range DPS for Volcanic. So storming is now much slower. It always travels clockwise, so you can always, predict the path of the storm. And now it's also going to despawn if it hits a player. It's not going to continue going for its entire duration. And then you add the classic, the classic patch by patch balance tuning, where the vast majority of dungeons were nerfed. Particular nerfs, pretty heavy nerfs, went on the other side when it came to bosses. Both Dealer Zayaxa and Hakkar got nerfed pretty heavily. You had Halls of Atonement, Thrash, that was also nerfed. You had Mist of Tirnaseeth, which was nerfed in both bosses and Thrash. You had Necrotic Wake, which was further nerfed in bosses as well. And even more pretty heavy nerfs to Sanguine Depths, to Crixis, to Executor Tarvold, and a bunch of Thrash as well, all nerfed. And a pretty significant nerf to Spies of Ascension's Ventunax, who is now going to remove all of the Shadow Worlds that he created every time he has to recharge. So another series of nerfs to many dungeons. And then the other main change that we got from the last season was the rating. I guess changing is a wrong term because rating in Season 1 didn't exist. Blizzard didn't have its own official rating. It was all up to people using Radar.io to gauge other people's experiences in Mythic Plus. Instead, Blizzard decided to say, okay, fine, everyone is using this anyways, so we might as well make our own, which is going to work very, very similarly. So even if you are not using our own, but you're using Radar.io's version or vice versa, it's still more or less going to tell you the same thing. Ours, of course, is going to be much more bare bones, is going to be much more simple and straightforward. From the Radar.io version, you can find, way more info and stats about a player at a glance, whereas ours is just gonna mostly tell you the rating, but I remember hearing and seeing quite a few doomsayers once Blizzard announced this. They thought the entire system would have crumbled on itself, that people would have started getting gated by this new scoring system, while in reality, as was predictable, not much has changed compared to the people who were already using a rating system from an add-on from a third-party site. The particular change wasn't just the fact that now you had a rating, finally an official rating from Blizzard. The real change was the fact that the rating was being split between Tyrannical and between Fortified. For months, if not years, people have complained about the difference of Fortified and Tyrannical. A Tyrannical is more annoying because it makes the boss fights be much longer, much more tedious. Also, the vast majority of the dungeon is going to be promoting AoE, is going to be promoting, let's just say, tuning your character for doing more AoE, for having better tools to deal with AoE, and even affixes which make this harder. Perhaps things like Raging or Necrotic or Sanguine, or even bolstering, anything that can deal with crowd controlling, for example. But then you have to deal with Tyrannical, which is just boss damage, most of the time just single target boss damage. And it always felt kind of bad. Not only that, but it felt cheap. It felt like one of those games who put 7 different difficulties, and the only thing that changes is that the enemies turn into one-shotting bullet sponges that take 6 years to kill, and they can one-shot you with a sneeze. That is not a nice way to make something more difficult, which is ultimately what Tyrannical does. It just gives more HP to the boss and it makes it do more damage. It doesn't add extra abilities, it doesn't add an extra phase, it doesn't change anything, it just makes it more tedious to go through. So Blizzard didn't really patch this, didn't really change the way Tyrannical works in and of itself, but at the very least they did make it more important to do. because the problem was, of course, that because people said, okay, I can do higher keys on Fortified. They are generally simpler. It's easier to tune your character for AoE during a Fortified week because that's where the hard part of the key is going to be. So I am just going to climb. I am just going to get my rating, or if I'm aiming at Keystone Master, I am just going to get my plus 15 dungeons during Fortified. Screw Tyrannical, I don't care. That was the issue that Blizzard was trying to solve with this. Now, to get Keystone Master, unless you're gonna do plus 22 keys of Fortified only, if you want to get Keystone Master, you have to get somewhere around the 15 range of keys for both Tyrannical and for Fortified. This ideally would have stopped people from turning Tyrannical weeks into a deserted zone and only ever play on Fortified. The change did have the intended result because, of course, way more people started playing Tyrannical. We even had some confessions, we even had some anonymous letters being sent, players wanting to remain anonymous out of shame, confessing that they actually started preferring Tyrannical weeks over preferring Fortified weeks. I know, very, very embarrassed to admit this. And one of the reasons why more and more people started having this feeling is the other change that happened in 9.1, which is the affixes. Blizzard started mixing and matching and trying multiple combination of affixes as opposed to 9.0, basically the first season of Shadowlands. Why is that? Well, it is that because in the first season of Shadowlands, all of the affixes were very fixed in stone. There were only a handful of affixes, generally speaking, the least impactful, the least dangerous affixes being changed. You had Bursting, which moved from Fortified to Tyrannical in Season 1, and you had Storming, which moved from Tyrannical to Fortified in Season 1. But most of the others, stayed in their lane. In Season 2, Blizzard went for a much more frequent type of swapping. In Season 2, not only are Bursting and Storming still alternating between Fortified and Tyrannical, you also had Raging alternating, you also had Inspiring alternating, you also had Spiteful, you had Sanguine, you had Bolstering, you had Explosive, you had Necrotic. They all started alternating between Tyrannical and between Fortified. As a matter of fact, there has been a near complete reversal, where in Season 2, the only affix that has stayed in its major affix lane is Grievous. Grievous is with Fortified and Inspiring on the 3rd week of the season, and is with Spiteful and Fortified on the 9th week of the season. That is basically the only affix that has stayed in the same combination of affixes for the season. Every other one has been jumbled around. And because every other one has been jumbled around, this, generally speaking, has made Fortified harder. Why is that? Because now Bolstering can end up with Fortified. Because now Necrotic has ended up in Fortified. Because Inspiring is still in Fortified. So this is making the Thrash weeks, because Fortified is just that. Fortified is a Thrash week. If you put in a Thrash week Bolstering, if you put in a Thrash week Necrotic, if you put in a Thrash week Raging, of course it's going to make it much harder, because these affixes are going to empower the Thrash a lot, and the Thrash is already empowered by Fortified, which makes it much harder. So that is why over time people started kind of getting the feeling that Tyrannical is somewhat easier, which isn't because Tyrannical has been made easy, it's more that Fortified has gotten harder this season. Now, for any other type of judgment, this leaves us with the main change, which we have left for last, which is of course the main affix, the seasonal affix that we have not gone over yet, which is Tormented. We moved from Prideful to Tormented. So the general feeling, I'm gonna speak for you, I'm gonna speak for my inmates listening to this, the general feeling is that Prideful was very cool and felt nice for the vast majority of the population, and then the higher you went in keys and the more of a hassle, the more of a basically an annoyance it started becoming. That's because when the HP of the mob gets so high that you start needing multiple offensive cooldowns and or multiple defensive cooldowns to even survive it, it starts not even being worth the buff that is going to give you. Whereas in lower keys, it's a blast. in lower keys, you get to kill it rather easily. You don't have to waste too many cooldowns, and then you get a major buff you get to play around with, pulling gigantic packs or doing a boss very, very quickly with that prideful buff. So you had this sort of split between the more casual, or rather the average player base, and the very top end, and the way they felt around prideful. Meanwhile, this time around, we got Tormented. Tormented doesn't suffer from this problem as much. There are some cases in which it's going to be fine to skip one of them, particularly based on what the last boss does. For example, if the last boss does almost exclusively magical damage, you can easily skip the physical damage debuff that is going to be left behind if you skip one of these bosses, for example, or bosses where movement is not that important, so you can get slowed in the last boss if you skip one. But for the majority of the time, you can just kill all of them, get all of your buffs, and it's gonna be, it's gonna feel fine for most levels of groups, for most levels of difficulty. Of course, when people heard about anima powers being given, they started being concerned about, for example, since Blizzard has a pretty heinous track record with this, which is the RNG. Oh, great. We're gonna have an anima power system where some DPS can end up doing 30% more damage in the key because he rolled OP anima powers and I am stuck with the shitty ones. So Blizzard decided to go for a contingency plan, which was make all of the powers fixed based on the role. So DPS, tanks, and healers are always going to get the exact same offers of powers from the exact same mini-bosses. So you always know what you're going to get based on the mini-boss every time. This, of course, has stunted a lot of diversity, a lot of possibilities for the sake of balance tuning, for the sake of being fair to everyone. People are going to feel different ways about this. I think there could have been more room for some extra additions, for some new changes. It might be possible that in 9.1.5 Blizzard might be planning something for this affix, even though, it's a seasonal affix and it's bound to go away in 9.2. So it's not something that is going to stay alive for much longer. I doubt Blizzard is going to put too much effort if they haven't changed anything about this in months. That's unlikely it's going to get any changes in the future. But that is why I wanted to make the video, to celebrate the end of the rotation of Mythic Plus, the full rotation we are getting with this last week, Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Explosive, which is also kind of fine. It's kind of cool because we have gotten the last 3 weeks, which weren't particularly easy, from Spiteful and Grievous down to last week of Sanguine Necrotic. Now you're going to have 3 weeks of Bolstering Explosive, and then Bursting Storming, and then Raging Volcanic. So it's 3 weeks of pretty easy combination of affixes, so it's a pretty chill set of Mythic Plus weeks. I wanted to take a look at the overall season and how you feel about it, about all of the changes, perhaps some which you have forgotten already. I thought most of those changes have been very positive. The quality of life changes for your keys, pretty much all, we can all agree, they are all very good changes. Being able to exchange your key if you don't like the dungeon you have been given, being able to get your keystone every week if you haven't done a Mythic Plus the week before, instead of being forced to go and do a key or do a Mythic 0 to get your key for the first time, is also a pretty good quality of life change, as well as being able to lower it from Oribos rather than having to go in the entrance and do the whole reset thing is also pretty good. Some of the more annoying affixes being nerfed is also very good. Storming was very complained about by the melee DPS, so it was good that it was being changed. Bolstering being made less annoying, and Necrotic partially being made less annoying is also very good. Some of the bosses that were also the most complained about, like Dealer Zayexa and the Arcane Lightning jumping around at higher keys, was a big problem. Hakkar has been a very big problem until this change. Hakkar no longer getting its energy to regen while he is in Blood Barrier has been a massive change for the whole key. The first boss of Mists, which used to take 7 years, now has been nerfed. Now it only takes 3 years in Tyrannical, is a good change. This leaves us mostly for your decision, your taste for the Seasonal Affix, Tormented, and the rating. Particularly not the rating in and of itself, but the split rating between Fortified and between Tyrannical. Personally, I am in favor of both. I think Tormented is one of my favorite affixes, close to Prideful, at lower-ish keys and also close to Awakened that we had in BFA. I think those are the most unique and fun and interactive type of affixes we have gotten in Mythic Plus, and I also agree with splitting the rating between Fortified and Tyrannical, given how much different your key turns into if you're doing a Fortified key or if you're doing a Tyrannical key. It is pretty logical. It does make sense to have the ratings split. It might not be enjoyed by people. It might expose some Mythic Plus frauds, you know, some people being exposed for only ever doing Fortified and never doing Tyrannical. Now they have to work a little bit harder in their Mythic Plus runs, but in general, I think it's a good change. We're going to close with the complaints. We're going to close with one of the things I would like to see in Mythic Plus and asking you what you would like to see changed in Mythic Plus. My main complaint is the rewards, because yes, okay, we haven't talked about it. Blizzard has added a challenge mode style of teleports. In Season 2, if you can complete a key at plus 20 or higher in time, you get a teleport to the dungeon. So you have up to 8 different teleports available. Every time you complete a key, the teleport refreshes in cooldown, so you can teleport around and do your keys instantly, basically. However, I still think it kind of needs something else. I would have enjoyed the addition of things like extra mounts, of things like titles, and also things like transmog sets from Mythic Plus. I don't really see why you can't add additional rewards, especially now that you have a rating. You no longer have to fix these rewards to, for example, completing a certain amount of keys at a certain level. Now you can just say, okay, at 2000 you get a mount, at 2300 you get a title, and at 2500 you get a transmog set. I think that would have further pushed players, further given players more incentives to go into Mythic Plus, to find a clear-cut reward for them, because after a while the item level becomes irrelevant, because you will start getting much higher item level deeper in the season, to the point that Mythic Plus gear is not really needed for you. The mount is for 2000 rating, which is around plus 15s, which is kind of early on, and the teleports, while being decent, is not too big of a reward. So I wished there were better incentives to keep people getting into Mythic Plus over the season, over the entire season, not just the first few weeks. That would be my main complaint when it comes to this new season of Mythic Plus. So, with this being said, let me guys know what would be your complaints, what you would want to see in Mythic Plus being added, and also what did you feel, how did you enjoy the second season of Mythic Plus, especially compared to the first season of Mythic Plus. Which of the things have been improved overall, or which of the things that have been changed that you have not enjoyed so far. With this, we can stop. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you've enjoyed the channel, you want to support myself, my cat, my dog, my parents, and even my 42 wives, you can like the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, okay, there has been some progress. From 32 degrees, we are going down to 30. We are still some 10 degrees higher than I would like, though.